Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Feet of Clay by Terry Pratchett, Part 12. Vimes told himself he was really going to inspect the progress on the new watch house in Chitling Street. Cock-Bill Street was just around the corner, and then he'd call in, informally. No sense in sparing a man when they were pushed anyway, with what these murders in Vetinari and Detritus's anti-slab crusade. He turned the corner and stopped. Nothing much had changed. That was the shocking thing. After, too many years, things had no right not to have changed. But washing lines still crisscrossed the street between the grey, ancient buildings. Antique paint still peeled in the way cheap paint peeled when it had been painted on wood too old and rotten to take paint. Cock-Bill Street people. Cock-Bill Street people were usually too penniless to afford decent paint, but always far too proud to use whitewash. And the place was slightly smaller than he remembered. That was all. When had he last come down here? He couldn't remember. It was beyond the shades, and up until quite recently, the watch had tended to leave that area to its own unspeakable devices. Unlike the shades, though, Cock-Bill Street was clean, with the haunting, empty cleanliness you get when people can't afford to waste dirt. For Cock-Bill Street was where people lived who were worse than poor, because they didn't know how poor they were. If you asked them why, they would probably... If you asked them, they would probably say something like, "Mustn't grumble," or "There's far worse off than us," or "We've always kept us heads above water, and we don't owe nobody note." He could hear his granny speaking. "No one's too poor to buy soap." Of course, many people were, but in Cock-Bill Street, they bought soap just the same. The table might not have any food on it, but by gods, it was well scrubbed. That was Cock-Bill Street, where what you mainly ate was your pride. What a mess the world was in, Vimes reflected. Constable Visit had told him the meek would inherit it. And what had the poor devils done to deserve that? Cock-Bill Street people would stand aside to let the meek through. For what kept them in Cock-Bill Street, mentally and physically, was their vague comprehension that there were rules, and they went through life filled with a quiet, distracted dread that they weren't quite obeying them. People said that there was one law for the rich and one law for the poor, but it wasn't true. There was no law for those who made the law, and no law for the incorrigibly lawless. All the laws and rules were for those people stupid enough to think like Cock-Bill Street people. It was oddly quiet. Normally, there'd be swarms of kids and carts heading down towards the docks. But today, the place had a shut-in look. In the middle of the road was a chalked hopscotch path. Vimes felt his knees go weak. It was still there. It was still here. When had he last seen it? 35 years ago. 40. So it must have been drawn and redrawn thousands of times. He'd been pretty good at it, of course. They'd played it by Ankh-Morpork rules. Instead of kicking a stone, they'd kicked William Scuggins. It had been just one of the many inventive games they'd played which had involved kicking, chasing, or jumping on William Scuggins until he threw one of his famous wobblers and started frothing and violently attacking himself. Vimes had been able to drop William in the square of his choice 9 times out often. Vimes had been able to drop William in the square of his choice 9 times out of 10. The 10th time, William bit his leg. In those days, tormenting William and finding enough to eat had made for a simple, straightforward life. There weren't so many questions you didn't know the answers to, except maybe how to stop your leg festering. Sir Samuel looked around saw the silent street and flicked a stone out of the gutter with his foot. Then he booted it surreptitiously along the squares. Surreptitiously, in a way that attempts to avoid notice or attention. Secretively, surreptitiously. Then he booted it surreptitiously along the squares, adjusted his coat, and hopped and jumped his way up, turned, hopped. What was it you shouted as you hopped? Salt? Mustard? Vinegar? Pepper? No. Or was it the one that went, William Scuggins is a bastard? Now he'd wonder about that all day. A door opened across the street. Vimes froze, one leg in mid-air, as 2 black-clothed figures came out slowly and awkwardly. This was because they were carrying a coffin. The natural solemnity of the occasion was diminished by their having to squeeze around it and out into the street, pulling the casket after them and allowing 2 other pairs of bearers to edge their way into the daylight. Vimes remembered himself in time to lower his other foot, and then remembered even more of himself and snatched his helmet off in respect. Another coffin emerged. It was a lot smaller. It needed only 2 people to carry it, and that was really one too many. As the mourners trooped out behind them, Vimes fumbled in a pocket for the scrap of paper Detritus had given him. The scene was, in its way, funny, like the bit in a circus where the coach stops and a dozen clowns get out of it. Apartment houses round here made up for their limited number of rooms by having a large number of people occupy them. He found the paper and unfolded it. First floor, back, 27 Cockbill Street. And this was it. He'd arrived in time for a funeral. 2 funerals. Looks like it's a really bad day to be a golem, said Angua. There was a pottery hand lying in the gutter. That's the third one we've seen smashed in the street. There was a crash up ahead, and a dwarf came through a window more or less horizontally. His iron helmet struck sparks as he hit the streets, but the dwarf was soon up again and plunging back through the adjacent doorway. He emerged via the window a moment later, but was fielded by Carrot, who set him on his feet.
Hello, Mr. All-Smiter. Are you keeping well? And what is happening here?
It's that devil Gimlet, Captain Carrot. You should be arresting him.
Why? What's he done?
He's been poisoning people, that's what.
Carrot glanced at Angua, then back at All-Smiter. Poison? He said. That's a very serious allegation.
You're telling me? I was up all night with Mrs. All-Smiter. I didn't think much about it until I came in here this morning, and there were other people complaining.
He tried to struggle out of Carrot's grip.
You know what? He said. You know what? We looked in his cold room, and you know what? You know what? You know what he's been selling as meat?
Tell me, said Carrot.
Pork and beef.
Oh dear.
And lamb.
Titch.
Hardly any rat at all.
Carrot shook his head at the duplicity of traders.
And Snorri Glordson's unclean son said he had rat surprise last night, and he'll swear there were chicken bones in it.
Carrot let go of the dwarf. You stay here, he said to Angua, and, head bowed, stepped inside Gimlet's whole food delicatessen. An axe spun towards him. He caught it almost absent-mindedly and tossed it casually aside.
Oh!
There was a melee of dwarves around the corner. The row had already gone well past the stage when it had anything much to do with the subject in hand, and these, being dwarves, now included matters of vital importance, such as whose grandfather had stolen whose grandfather's mining claim 300 years ago, and whose axe was at whose throat right now. But there was something about Carrot's presence. The fighting gradually stopped. The fighters tried to look as if they just happened to be standing there. There was a sudden and general,
Axe? What axe? Oh, this axe. I was just showing it to my friend Bjorn here. Good old Bjorn.
Feel to the atmosphere. All right, said Carrot. What's all this about poison? Mr. Gimlet first.
It's a diabolical lie,
shouted Gimlet from somewhere under the heap.
I run a wholesome restaurant. My tables are so clean you could eat your dinner off them.
Carrot raised his hands to stop the outburst this caused. Someone said something about rats, he said.
I told them I use only the very best rats, shouted Gimlet. Good, plump rats from the best locations. None of your latrine rubbish, and they're hard to come by, let me tell you.
And when you can't get them, Mr. Gimlet, said Carrot. Gimlet paused. Carrot was hard to lie to.
All right, he mumbled. Maybe when there's not enough, I might sort of plump out the stock with some chicken. Maybe just a bit of beef. Ha! A bit!
More voices were raised.
That's right! You should see his cold room, Mr. Carrot. Yeah, he uses steak and cuts little legs in it and covers it with rat sauce. I don't know, You try to do your best at very reasonable prices, and this is the thanks you get, said Gimlet hotly. It's hard enough to make ends meet as it is. You don't even make them of the right meat,
Carrot sighed. There were no public health laws in Ankh-Morpork. It would be like installing smoke detectors in hell.
All right, he said. But you can't get poisoned by steak. No, honestly. No, shut up, all of you. No, I don't care what your mothers told you. Now I want to know about this poisoning, Gimlet.
Gimlet struggled to his feet.
We did rat surprise last night for the Sons of Blood Axe annual dinner, he said.
There was a general groan.
And it was rat.
He raised his voice against the complaining.
You can't use anything else. Listen, you got to have the noses poking through the pastry, all right? Some of the best rat we've had in a long time, let me tell you.
And you were all ill afterwards, said Carrot, taking out his notebook.
Sweating all night. Couldn't see straight. I reckon I know every knothole on the back of the privy door.
I'll write that down as definitely, said Carrot. Was there anything else on the dinner menu?
Vol au vent and cream of rat, said Gimlet.
All hygienically prepared.
How do you mean hygienically prepared? Said Carrot. The chef is under strict orders to wash his hands afterwards.
The assembled dwarves nodded. This was certainly pretty hygienic. You didn't want people going around with ratty hands.
Anyway, you've all been eating here for years, said Gimlet,
sensing this slight veer in his direction.
This is the first time there's been any trouble, isn't it? My rats are famous.
Your chicken's going to be pretty famous too, said Carrot. There was laughter this time. Even Gimlet joined in.
All right, I'm sorry about the chicken, but it was that or very poor rat, and you know I only buy from wee Mad Arthur. He's trustworthy, whatever else you may say about him. You just can't get better rats. Everyone knows that.
That'll be wee Mad Arthur in Gleam Street, said Carrot.
Yes, not a mark on him most of the time.
Have you got any left?
One or two.
Gimlet's expression changed.
Here, you don't think he poisoned them, do you? I never did trust that little bugger.
Inquiries are continuing, said Carrot. He tucked his notebook away. I'd like some rats, please. Those rats. To go. He glanced at the menu, patted his pocket and looked questioningly out through the door at Angua. You don't have to buy them, she said warily. They're evidence. We can't defraud an innocent tradesman who may be the victim of circumstances, said Carrot.
You want ketchup? Said Gimlet. Only they're extra with ketchup.
The funeral carriage went slowly through the streets. It looked quite expensive, but that was Cockbill Street for you. People put money by. Vimes remembered that. You always put money by in Cockbill Street. You saved up for a rainy day even if it was pouring already, and you'd die of shame if people thought you could afford only a cheap funeral. Half a dozen black-clad mourners came along behind, together with perhaps a score of people who had tried at least to look respectable. Vimes followed the procession at a distance all the way to the cemetery behind the Temple of Small Gods, where he lurked awkwardly among the gravestones and somber graveyard trees while the priest mumbled on. The gods had made the people of Cockbill Street poor, honest, and provident, Vimes reflected. They might as well have hung signs saying, "Kick me," on their backs and had done with it. Yet Cockbill Street people tended towards religion, at least of the less demonstrative kind. They always put a little life by for a rainy eternity. Eventually the crowd around the graves broke up and drifted away with the aimless look of people whose immediate future contains ham rolls. Vimes spotted a tearful young woman in the main group and advanced carefully. Are you Mildred Easy?" he said. She nodded. "Who are you?" She took in the cut of his coat and added, "Sir?" "Was that old Mrs. Easy who used to do dressmaking?" said Vimes, taking her gently aside. "That's right." And the smaller coffin?" "That was our William." The girl looked as if she were about to cry again. "Can we have a talk?" said Vimes. "There are some things I hope you can tell me." He hated the way his mind worked. A proper human being would have shown respect and quietly walked away. But as he'd stood among the chilly stones, a horrible apprehension had stolen over him that almost all the answers were in place now. If only he could work out the questions. She looked around at the other mourners. They had reached the gate and were staring back curiously at the two of them. I know this isn't the right time," said Vimes. "But when the kids play hopscotch in the street, what's the rhyme they sing? Salt, mustard, vinegar, pepper, isn't it?" She stared at his worried grin. "That's a skipping rhyme," she said coldly. "When they play hopscotch, they sing, 'Billy Skunkins is a brass stud.' Who are you?" "I'm Commander Vimes of the Watch," said Vimes. "So Willie Scuggins would live on in the street, in disguise and in fashion, and old Stoneface was just some guy on a bonfire." Then her tears came. It's all right," said Vimes, as soothingly as he could. "I was brought up in Cockbill Street. That's why I'm not here on. I'm not out to. Look, I know you took food home from the palace. That's all right by me. I'm not here to. Oh, damn. Would you like my handkerchief? I think your one's full." "Everyone does it." "Yes, I know. Anyway, Cook never says nothing." She began to sob again. Yes. "Everyone takes a few things," said Mildred Easy. "It's not like stealing." "It is," thought Vimes treacherously, "but I don't give a damn." And now he'd got a grip on the long copper rod and was climbing into a high place while the thunder muttered around him. The last food you were given," he said. "What was it?" "Just some blancmange and some, that sort of jam made out of meat." "Pâté?" "Yes, I thought it would be a little treat." Vimes nodded. "Rich, mushy food. The sort you'd give to a baby who was peaky and to a granny who hadn't got any teeth." Well, he was on the roof now. The clouds were black and threatening, and he might as well wave the lightning conductor. Time to ask. The wrong question, as it proved. "Tell me," he said, "what did Mrs. Easy die of?" "Let me put it like this," said Cheery. "If these rats had been poisoned with lead instead of arsenic, you'd have been able to sharpen their noses and use them as a pencil." She lowered the beaker. "Are you sure?" said Carrot. "Yes."
Wee Mad Arthur wouldn't poison rats, would he? Especially not rats that were going to be eaten.
I've heard he doesn't like dwarves much, said Angua.
Yes, but business is business. No one who does a lot of business with dwarves likes them much, and he must supply every dwarf cafe and delicatessen in the city.
Maybe they ate arsenic before he caught them, said Angua. People use it as a rat poison after all.
Yes, said Carrot, in a very deliberate way. They do.
You're not suggesting that Vetinari tucks into a nice rat every day, said Angua.
I've heard he uses rats as spies, so I don't think he uses them as elevenenses. Elevenses, a short break for light refreshments taken at about 11 o'clock in the morning. Elevenses. What? Elevenses. I've heard he uses rat as spies, so I don't think he uses them as elevenses, said Carrot. But it'd be nice to know where wee Mad Arthur gets his from, don't you think?
Commander Vimes said he was looking after the Vetinari case, said Angua.
But we're just finding out why Gimlet's rats are full of arsenic, said Carrot innocently. Anyway, I was going to ask Sergeant Cullen to look into it.
But wee Mad Arthur, said Angua. He's mad.
Fred can take Nobby with him. I'll go and tell him. Cheery?
Yes, Captain.
You've been trying to hide your face from me. Oh, did someone hit you?
No, sir.
Only your eyes look a bit bruised and your lips.
I'm fine, sir, said Cheery desperately.
Oh, well, if you say so, I'll look for Sergeant Cullen then.
He backed out, embarrassed. That left the two of them. All girls together, thought Angua. One normal girl between the two of us, at any rate. I don't think the mascara works, Angua said. The lipstick's fine, but the mascara, I don't think so. I think I need practice. You sure you want to keep the beard?
You don't mean shave?
Cheery backed away. All right. What about the iron helmet?
It belonged to my grandmother. It's dwarfish.
Fine. Okay. You've made a good start anyway.
What do you think of this?
Said Cheery, handing her a bit of paper. Angua read it. It was a list of names, although most of them were crossed out. Cheery Littlebottom, Cherry, Cherry, Sherry, 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 Sherri, Lucinda Littlebottom, Shari, Cherry. What do you think? Said Cheery nervously.
Lucinda?
Said Angua, raising her eyebrows. I've always liked the sound of the name.
Cherie is nice,
said Angua, and it is rather like the one you've got already. The way people spell in this town, no one will actually notice unless you point it out to them. Chery's shoulders sagged with released tension. When you've made up your mind to shout out who you are to the world, it's a relief to know that you can do it in a whisper.
Sherry,
thought Angua. Now what does that name conjure up? Does the mental picture include iron boots, iron helmet, a small worried face and a long beard? Well, it does now. Somewhere underneath Ankh-Morpork, a rat went about its business. Ambling unconcernedly through the ruins of a damp cellar. It turned a corner towards the grain store it knew was up ahead, and almost walked into another rat. This one was standing on its hind legs though, and wearing a tiny black robe and carrying a scythe. Such of its snout that could be seen was bone white.
"Squeak,"
it said. Then the vision faded and revealed a slightly smaller figure. There was nothing in the least rat-like about it, apart from its size. It was human, or at least humanoid. It was dressed in rat skin trousers, but was bare above the waist, apart from 2 bandoliers that crisscrossed its chest, and it was smoking a tiny cigar.
Bandoliers.
Bandoliers. Bandolier, a shoulder belt with loops or pockets for cartridges. It was dressed in rat skin trousers, but was bare above the waist, apart from 2 bandoliers that crisscrossed its chest, and it was smoking a tiny cigar. It raised a very small crossbow and fired. The soul of the rat, for anything so similar in so many ways to human beings, certainly has a soul, watched gloomily as the figure took its recent habitation by the tail and towed it away. Then it looked up at the death of rats. "Squeak," it said. The grim squeaker nodded. "Squeak." A minute later, wee Mad Arthur emerged into the daylight, dragging the rat behind him. There were 57 neatly lined up along the wall, but despite his name, wee Mad Arthur made a point of not killing the young and the pregnant females. It's always a good idea to make sure you've got a job tomorrow. His sign was still tacked up over the hole. Wee Mad Arthur, as the only insect and vermin exterminator able to meet the enemy on its own terms, found that it paid to advertise. Wee Mad Arthur, for those little things that get you down. Rats, free. Mice, 1p per 10 tails. Moles, 1/2p each. Wasps, 50p per nest. Hornets, 20p extra. Cockroaches and similar by arrangement. Small fees, big jobs. Arthur took out the world's smallest notebook and a piece of pencil lead. "See here now, 58 skins at 2 a penny. City bounty for the tails at a penny per 10, and the carcasses to Gimlet at 2 pence per 3, the hard-driving dwarf bastard that he was." There was a moment's shadow, and then someone tapped on him. "Right," said the owner of the boot. "Still catching rats without a guild card, are you? Easiest $10 we ever earned, Sid. Let's go in." The man was lifted several inches off the ground, whirled around and hurled against the wall. His companion stared as a streak of dust raced across his boot, but reacted too late. "He's gone up me trousers! He's gone up me eye!" There was a crack. "Me knee! Me knee! He's broken me knee!" The man who had been flung aside tried to get up, but something scurried across his chest and landed astride his nose. "Hey, pal," said wee Mad Arthur. "Can your mother sew, pal? Yeah? Then get her to stitch this one." He grabbed an eyelid in each hand and thrust his head forward with pinpoint precision. There was another crack as the skulls met. The man with the broken knee tried to drag himself away, but wee Mad Arthur leapt from his stunned comrade and proceeded to kick him. The kicks of a man not much more than 6 inches high should not hurt, but wee Mad Arthur seemed to have a lot more mass than his size would allow. Being nutted by Arthur was like being hit by a steel ball from a slingshot. A kick seemed to have all the power of one from a large man, but very painfully concentrated into a smaller area. "Yous can tell them buggers at the Rat Catchers Guild that I works for who's I want and charges what I like," he said between kicks. "And them shites can stop trying to persecute the small businessman." the other guild enforcer made it to the end of the alley, Arthur gave Sid a final kick and left him in the gutter. Wee Mad Arthur walked back to his task, shaking his head. He worked for nothing and sold his rats for half the official rate. A heinous crime. Yet Wee Mad Arthur was growing rich because the guild hadn't got its joint heads around the idea of fiscal relativity. Arthur charged a lot more for his services, a lot more, that is, from the specialized and above all low point of view of Wee Mad Arthur. What Ankh-Morpork had yet to understand was that the smaller you are, the more your money is worth. $1 for a human bought a loaf of bread that was eaten in a few bites. The same dollar for Wee Mad Arthur bought the same sized loaf, but it was food for a week and could then be further hollowed out and used as a bedroom. The size differential problem was also responsible for his frequent drunkenness. Few publicans were prepared to sell beer by the thimbleful or had gnome-sized mugs. Wee Mad Arthur had to go drinking in a swimming costume. But he liked his work. No one could clear out rats like Wee Mad Arthur. Old and cunning rats that knew all about traps, deadfalls, and poison were helpless in the face of his attack, which was where, in fact, he often attacked. The last thing they felt was a hand gripping each of their ears, and the last thing they saw was his forehead approaching at speed. Muttering under his breath, Wee Mad Arthur got back to his calculations, but not for long. He spun around, forehead cocked.
"It's only us, Wee Mad Arthur,"
said Sergeant Cullen, stepping back hurriedly.
"That's Mr. Wee Mad Arthur to use, copper,"
said Wee Mad Arthur, but he relaxed a little.
"We're Sergeant Cullen and Corporal Nobbs," said Cullen.
"Yeah, you remember us, don't you?" said Nobby in a wheedling voice. "We was the ones who helped you when you was fighting them 3 dwarves last week."
"Yez pulled me off for them, if that's what you mean," said Wee Mad Arthur, "just when I got 'em all down." "We want to talk to you about some rats," said Cullen.
"Can't take on any more customers," said Wee Mad Arthur firmly.
"Some rats you sold to Gimlet's Whole Food Delicatessen a few days ago? What's that to yez?"
"He reckons they were poisoned. He reckons they was poisoned," said Nobby, who had taken the precaution of moving behind Cullen. "I never uses poison." Cullen realized that he was backing away from a man 6 inches high.
"Yeah, well, see, thing is, you being in fights and that, you don't get on with dwarves, some people might say. Thing is, it could look like you might have a grudge."
He took another step back and almost tripped over Nobby.
"Grudge? Why would I have a grudge, pal? It ain't me that gets the kicking," said Wee Mad Arthur, advancing. Good point, said Cullen. "Only it'd help, right, if you could tell us where you got those rats from."
"Like the Patrician's palace, maybe," said Nobby.
"The palace? No one catches rats at the palace. That's not allowed." "No, I remember those rats. They was good fat ones. I wanted a penny each, but he held out for 4 for 3 pence, the old skin flint that he is." "Where did you get them then?"
Wee Mad Arthur shrugged. "Down the cattle market. I do the cattle market Tuesdays. Couldn't tell yez where they came from. Them tunnels, guz, everywhere, see."
"Could they've eaten poison before you caught them?" said Cullen.
Wee Mad Arthur bristled. "No one puts down poison round here. I won't have it, see?
I got all the contracts along the shambles, and I won't deal with any gobshite who uses poison. I doesn't charge for extermination, see? Guild hates that, but I chooses me customers. Wee Mad Arthur grinned wickedly. I only goes where's there's the finest eating for the rats, and I clean up flogging them to the lawn ornaments. I find anyone using poison on my patch. They can pay guild rates for guild work. Ha! And see how they like it. I can see you're going to be a big man in industrial catering, said Cullen. Wee Mad Arthur put his head on one side. Do yous know what happened to the last man that made a crack like that? He said. No, said Cullen. Neither does anyone else, said Wee Mad Arthur, 'cause he was never found. Have yez finished? Only I got Wasp's nest to clean out before I go home. So you were catching them under the shambles? Colin persisted. All the way along. It's a good beat. There's tanners, tallow men, butchers, sausage makers. That's good grazing if you're a rat. Yeah, right, said Cullen. Fair enough. Well, I reckon we've taken up enough of your time. How do you catch wasps? Said Nobby, intrigued. Smoke 'em out? 'Tis unsupported not to hit them on the wing, said Wee Mad Arthur. But if it's a busy day, I make up squibs out of that number. I make up squibs out of that number 1 black powder the alchemists sell. He indicated the laden bandoliers over his shoulders. You blow them up? Said Nobby. That don't sound too sporting. Yeah? Just ever tried setting and lighting half a dozen fuses and then fighting your way back out of the entrance before the first one goes off? It's a wild goose chase, Sarge, said Nobby as they strolled away. Some rats and some poison somewhere and he got them. What are we supposed to do about it? Poisoning rats ain't illegal. Colin scratched his chin. I think we could be in a bit of trouble, Nobby, he said. I mean, everyone's been bustling around detectoring, and we could end up looking a right couple of noddies. I mean, do you want to go back to the yard and say we talked to Wee Mad Arthur and he said it wasn't him? End of story? We're humans, right? Well, I am, and I know you probably are. And we're definitely bringing up the rear around here. I'm telling you, this ain't my watch anymore, Nobby. Trolls, dwarfs, gargoyles, I've got nothing against them, you know me. But I'm looking forward to my little farm with chickens round the door, and I wouldn't mind going out with something to be proud of. Well, what do you want us to do? Knock on every door round the cattle market and ask them if they got any arsenic in the place? Yep, said Colin. Walk and talk. That's what Vimes always says. There's hundreds of them. Anyway, they'd say no. Right, but we got to ask. 'Tain't like it used to be, Nobby. This is modern policing, detectoring. These days, we got to get results. I mean, the watch is getting bigger. I don't mind old Detritus being a sergeant. He's not bad when you get to know him. But one of these days, it could be a dwarf giving out orders, Nobby. It's all right for me, 'cause I'll be out on my farm. Nailing chickens round the door, said Nobby. But you've got your future to think about. And the way things are going, maybe the watch will be looking for another captain. It'll be a right bugger if he turned out to have a name like Strong in the Army or Shale, so you'd better look smart. You never wanted to be a captain, Fred? Me? A officer? I have my pride, Nobby. I've nothing against officering for them as is called to it. But it's not for the likes of me. My place is with the common man. I wish mine was, said Nobby gloomily. Look what was in my pigeonhole this morning.
He handed the sergeant a square of card with gold edging.
Lady Selachi will be at home this PM from 5 onwards and requests the pleasure of the company of Lord Denobs, he read.
Oh.
I've heard about these rich old women, said Nobby dejectedly. I reckon she wants me to be in a gigolo. Is that right?
No,
said the sergeant, looking at Passion's most unlikely plaything.
I know this stuff from my uncle. At home is like a bit of a drink stew. It's where all you knobs hobnob nobby. You just drink and scoff and talk about literature and the arts.
I haven't got any posh clothes, said Nobby.
Ah, that's where you score, Nobby, said Cullen. Uniforms is okay, adds a bit of tone, in fact, especially if you look dashing, he said, ignoring the evidence that Nobby was, in fact, merely runny.
Is that a fact? Said Nobby, brightening up a bit. I've got a lot more of them invites too, he said. Posh cards what look like they've been nibbled along the edges with gold teeth. Dinners, balls, all kinds of stuff. Colin looked down at his friend. A strange and yet passive thought crept into his mind.
Well, he said, it's the end of the social season, see? Time's running out.
What for?
Well, could be all them posh women want to marry you off to their daughters who are in season.
What?
Nothing beats an earl except a duke, and we haven't got one of them. And we ain't got a king, neither. The Earl of Ankh would be what they calls a social catch.
Yes, it was easier if he said it to himself like that. If you substituted Nobby Nobs for Earl of Ankh, it didn't work. But it did work when you just said Earl of Ankh. There'd be many women who'd be happy to be the mother-in-law of the Earl of Ankh, even if it meant having Nobby Nobs into the bargain. Well, a few anyway. Nobby's eyes gleamed. Never thought of that, he said. And some of these girls have a bit of cash too.
More'n you, Nobby.
And of course, I owes it to my posterity to see that the line of Nobses doesn't die out, Nobby added thoughtfully. Colin beamed at him with the rather worried expression of a mad doctor who has bolted on the head, applied the crackling lightning to the electrodes, and is now watching his creation lurch down to the village.
Caw,
said Nobby, his eyes now unfocusing slightly.
Right, but before that, said Cullen, I'll do all the places along the shambles, and you do Chitling Street, and then we can push off back to the yard. Job done and dusted. Okay?